Hey guys, it's Divine from Merch.com. Long-term investing sounds great to a lot of merchants. Less messing around with grand exchange offers, less time needed, but still decent profit. It is true that long-term investing takes up less of your time, but you shouldn't be doing it until you're very skilled at flipping and at short-term investments. If you have not yet learned how to do those, then I recommend you to watch the video guides on them first and return here later. If you consider yourself ready, then I'll teach you my way of going about long-term investments, which will hopefully lead to some amazing profits on your end. So what's the difference between short and long-term investing other than, of course, the time frame? The difference is the reason why you invest. With short-term investing, you look for items that you think are undervalued based on their recent history and other items that are related to them. If an item is undervalued, something is bound to happen with it anywhere between a few hours or days, and that's where you'll be making your profit. When you do long-term investments, you're betting on the long-term potential of the item. You expect there to be more demand than supply over the next weeks or months, but not because an item is undervalued or, as people often tend to say, it seems low. Like I said in the short-term investing guide, buying an item because it is lower than it has been in a long time is one of the dumbest reasons there are, because there is always a reason why it is that low in the first place. If you don't know that reason, you don't know what you're getting yourself into, and you risk the item dropping even lower. This very much applies to long-term investing as well. If the item you're looking into for long-term investment is crashing, then understand or at least research why it is crashing, as that is crucial to help you get a view on what will happen in the long term. To find items to long-term invest in, you should not specifically look for items that are crashing or stable or rising. It does matter what the item is doing, but it's not your main search criteria. You want to find items with great long-term potential. Of course, it is the nicest if your item is dropping, as you can buy lower. And to view a selection of these items, I sometimes use the Tier 3 VIP page, which shows an overview of interesting long-term investments based on math. This narrows down the options a lot and can make it a lot quicker to find an item. But what matters the most is an understanding of what impacts the game in the long term. The only way to give a good overview of that is to watch all the RuneScape news everywhere you can. This may take up a few hours a week if you do it thoroughly, but this will also give you insights in a lot of interesting update investments, so you're kind of doing two things at the same time. Update investments are far more profitable and more likely to succeed than long-term investments. The reason for this is that a good future update is definitely going to change the balance between supply and demand for your item. With a long-term investment, that remains to be seen. You should always pick investments for specific updates over long-term investments for this reason, but if there are no decent updates to invest for, which is the case pretty often nowadays, then long-term investments can be a good alternative. To map out a change as well, I use a timeline and put all the relevant events on it. This may sound like a lot of work to you, but once you get it, it's easy to do. Costs little time, and it will prevent you from forgetting stuff that make or break your investments, which is really important. If I find an item with interesting behavior through my research, I'll put it on a timeline, kind of like a spreadsheet, and I'll watch it along with other items, see how it's doing at certain points. You could run through this list of items once or twice a week, or however often you want to do. And then when I need to do a long-term investment, I look at the current graph of the item and why that is the way it is. If the graph is overly stable, it probably won't be an interesting investment, unless it will become more relevant in the future for some reason. If an item keeps crashing in the long term, then there is a heavy imbalance between supply and demand. Unless that gets changed around because of certain updates or events in the game, this would be a very risky investment, and that's the case with a lot of botted items where people keep talking, I should buy this because it hasn't been this low in so long. But as long as Jagex doesn't ban the bots, these items are just going to keep on crashing continuously just because the supply is so massive. If the item keeps rising, you need to understand why it does that and how long it may potentially keep going. You can figure this out based on alternative options, your personal opinion, and the opinion of friends. Let's say you're looking into magic logs. They can never go much higher than a certain amount of the price of elder logs, or people would shift to using those as they would be better GP per XP. This gives you an indication of how much potential of an item there is left, like how much it can potentially rise still, as at a certain point people are just going to switch options. Then your personal opinion and those of friends matter a lot. How much do you think people are really willing to pay for this item given the circumstances? A perfect example here are scrimshaws. they could potentially be bought up to 3 or 4 mil each quite easily, as the supply is rather limited and pretty much depends on how many people are doing player-owned ports. And with a fairly limited supply of the trade goods, they come in pretty slow. But nobody in their right mind is going to spend 4 mil for this tiny bonus from a scrimshaw, which gives that bonus for only like 3 hours or something. Unless the potential reward, of course, is that high that it becomes worth using a scrimshaw like that, but we're talking about billions then. In my eyes, the best items for investments are those that fluctuate enough as there are more points to buy and sell, and you have more insight in what events or updates in the game influence the price of the item. If you look at their graphs, almost every major spike can be explained due to certain events in the game. Items with stepped graphs can also be an interesting choice. These only update once per so many days because there's really little volume being traded. There are thus less people involved as they are harder to deal with, which means less competition for you. I'll use one of these stepped graphs as an example to explain the rest, which is the scrimshaw of ranging that I've actually done a small investment in. It's unusual for me to share my investments, and I'm definitely not telling you to buy in. It's actually kind of better to stay away. But it's the best example to explain a long-term investment at the moment, so I decided to use it anyways. Starting at the beginning, when the first Rune Labs poll came out, Adamant and Rune Dragons were clearly winning. So I looked into possible investments for them in the long term, and of course weapons and armor are perfect for this, but you're not going to buy those for the long term if they keep crashing because so many people are killing bosses in the long run. They're better for a short-term investment, which is also likely what a lot of people will be doing, but if you want to do stuff in the long term, you need to do something else. It was also unknown at that time what style would be best to kill these dragons, so that made investing in gear pretty difficult. Magic seemed like the most likely option, as you needed this for the other metal dragons, but you can't just assume that Jagex is going to follow this trend and make these dragons weak to magic as well. What you can assume is that people are going to want to get the unique drops like really badly. So I had a look at scrimshaws, as high-level PVMers would definitely use these to get just a bit faster kills, to be among the first to get unique drops from these dragons. Now you might say, hold on, isn't that like an update investment then? But not specifically, just hear me out here. I put these scrimshots in a spreadsheet and I waited for some more news, as obviously it's really early to act on so little news. And later on it became clear that Dragonbane ammo would be involved in at least one phase of killing rune dragons. So I marked that info on the timeline of various items I was looking into. Ranged will clearly be needed to kill them, but it may not be the only thing if they are talking about phases, like you have Zulrah in Old School, where you have to change between ranged and magic. Now next up, the May road trip thing was announced with double ports voyages again. And these double voyages crash the ports rewards, including scrimshaws, because pretty much everyone can send out trade good missions every day because they can like refresh the mission so much until they get them. So I started investing in the ranging scrimshaws at this point. They may not be needed or much in demand for the dragons specifically, but when I started buying them around 1 mil each, they clearly had more potential in the long term, as they're going to be more used than that. Before investing, I quickly checked 4 criteria to make sure that this was going to be a good decision, which you should always do as well. First off, bots. Do they impact your item, and how? A lot of items are related to how Jagex is doing on bot banning, like herbs and all these kinds of resources that are dropped from monsters. Now recently things were really bad, but then Jagex stepped up its game again, meaning a lot of items that crashed due to an oversupply from bots in the long run will now rise again in the long term, regardless of game updates. In my case, bots don't bring in the scrimshaws and they don't use them, so it's no impact on this item. Secondly, the limit per 4 hours in relation to the potential profit. If you can only put 5 mil per 4 hours into an item and the potential profit is 500k per item, it just isn't worth your time, effort and money in the long term. If that profit is more along the lines of 2 to 3 mil per 4 hours, it becomes more interesting for a longer period of time. In my case, there is enough potential for the scrimshaws to rise from like 1 mil to at least 1.3 mil each, so it's not amazing, but worth it if you have the accounts to spare. Thirdly, can the item get overtaken in the near future? To give you an example, if you're investing in a summoning secondary when it is known that Jagex will do a summoning update without charms in the near future, that's highly risky. You always have to check what updates are ahead and whether they make an impact on your item, whether they make it less relevant basically. In the case of ranging scrimshaws, there weren't currently any imminent threats, so this also doesn't have any impact right now. Then fourthly and lastly, is it easy to liquidate the item? You can invest in some very obscure items, but will people be willing to buy them at a large scale? And like if you have to dump them really quickly, can that be at a reasonable price still while losing only a little bit? If a more interesting investment opportunity pops up, you need to be able to free up cash from some of your investments to put into this item. You won't be able to if all of them trade very slowly. And in my case, scrimshaws aren't the fastest, as obviously they have a stepped graph. And I have plenty of other investments that I can sell off quickly, so to me it isn't an issue. But to some other people, if this is like their only investment, it may be a different case. Now with these 4 steps, you should be able to minimize risk and do more successful investments. After this explanation, I'll probably still get questions from people saying they still don't have a clue how to find items to invest in. Now, like I said before, you need to research your items and practice enough through flipping and short-term investing. You really learn a lot about item behavior by doing that. If you feel like you can't find items to invest in, then you're quite likely not experienced enough in flipping yet, and you need to be honest with yourself and get back into that. Once you really start digging into items, you will understand what makes them move, and that's really what you need to know here. Then the last question I often get is, how do you know when to sell? You have people who say that you should set this sell price in stone the moment you buy the item. Like, I want to make 10% profit and I'll sell as soon as I reach that. Now, I personally find this kind of a bad approach, as sometimes things change along the way. You need to evaluate the item based on the current situation. If you've done a bunch of price checks and the item hasn't really moved much anymore when you expected it to, then maybe you need to consider selling off if things aren't specifically looking up for the future. You should refer to your timeline again and look at whether you will need your cash for other investments or if anything is coming up that might change the situation. Keep in mind that any investment that drags on for too long automatically becomes less interesting, as there are more profitable alternatives that pop up all the time. If your item is crashing, you can be stubborn and hold on to it for weeks or months longer in the hopes that you'll still sell it for a good profit, but sometimes you just need to cut your losses and use the money to earn back what you lost quicker. If your item is rising quite fast, then maybe you set your target kind of low and need to watch its potential carefully. That's it for the long-term investment guide. Let me know in the comments if it helped you or if you still have any questions. Take care guys, and I'll see you all again next week for another video.